Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and that you're following the 3H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about the state of Georgia, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. So I have a story. A few, actually. I didn't really think much of these until very recently. When I was about 12, I lived in Georgia. I lived on the coast near Savannah, on one of the islands out there. The island had its own grocery store, a few drive-ins, 2 gas stations, and some odds and ends stores. 5-ish miles away was an island with a Walmart, and we could go to a third island or Savannah for anything else we needed. Most of the island, though, was marshland and woods, in addition to housing developments. Most of these housing developments were about 20 years or newer, but the neighborhood I lived in was older and thus poorer than the others. I had a small group of friends, and my friends and I used to go exploring in the woods and marshes. It's worth noting that I'm not from the South, and I've been homeschooled for most of my life due to constant moving, my parents' jobs. This made me sort of an outsider with my good old boys and girls friends. And although that I remember everything about them and knew a ton about them, I really doubt that any of them remember me at all, and none of them cared enough to learn much about me. I was that guy, an outsider within the group. This is important to remember when it comes to my stories. The first story took place toward the end of summer. This is technically the second story order-wise, but it's probably best told first. I had caught a head cold and spent 3 days sleeping non-stop in my room. And I only told my best friend Hank. I only told him over the phone for that matter. The weather had cooled down a lot, but it was still warm even at night, so we had taken to camping a lot in the woods near our houses, and sometimes further from home because it was the perfect weather for that. While I was sick, my friends went camping without me. What happens is now a retelling of what Hank and another friend, his cousin Andy, told me after I got better and left my house. Hank, Andy, and Hank's girlfriend Michelle, and 3 of their mutual friends had been hanging out all day and decided last minute to camp in the woods near Hank's house. So they pitched a few tents right beside the woods, nearest to a pond that was in between his house and the woods, and they got to goofing around. Shortly after dark, they heard loud splashing in the pond, like someone was swimming late at night, but they didn't bother to go check it out, as it wasn't out of the question that somebody would be swimming that late out there. A few minutes later, though, I apparently showed up at the campsite, soaking wet and acting kind of off. Apparently, I didn't say anything. I just came up, sat down near the fire, and started watching people really awkwardly. Hank ends up asking me if I feel alright, and I told him that I was fine. I just felt lonely and decided to join them, and his mother told me where he was. Now, only he knew that I had been sick, and he didn't apparently want to bring it up because Andy was a major germaphobe. So he just sort of shrugged it off, and they went on with their evening to the best of their abilities, while I sat there, not talking, just watching them. After a while, I dried off, and both Hank, Andy, and everyone else told me that I started stinking, and I got the creative nickname of Stinky because of this, like a dead animal. Michelle started gagging from it apparently, and everyone apparently jokingly told me to go take a shower. So I got up, walked out into the woods in front of them. Hank and Michelle and Andy followed me, thinking they'd hurt my feelings, only to see me calmly walk into the pond until I was up to my waist, dive in the rest of the way, and come up a while later, walk back out, all without saying anything. It's worth noting as well that I can't really swim, and I hate diving due to a fear of inhaling water and choking, so the chances of me doing that, especially fully clothed, are pretty slim. After that, I apparently sat back down and resumed being awkward. When I started smelling again after drying off, they kindly decided not to bring it up. Michelle told me later that I smelled like I was rotting, and she kept moving further from me because of it. So time goes by, and everyone decides to go to bed. Aside from me saying, I'm fine, I've apparently said nothing, and they've basically forgotten I'm there. Hank tells me to go home. He said he was basically insisting because no one wanted to share a tent with me, but I refused, and Andy and another friend, Corey, decided to share a tent with me, so they go in and apparently had to call me into the tent repeatedly, and once I did go in, I just laid down on the floor, facing the wall, nothing under me. Due to the stink, apparently neither of them could get to sleep very easily, and according to Corey, I just constantly turned my head really awkwardly and watched them. This went on to about 5 a.m. when I suddenly got up, standing as high as I could in the tent, walked out, and that was it. They didn't see me again until 36 hours later when I actually left my house finally. Although it probably isn't that spooky, I know I didn't go out there. I've tried shrugging it off as a joke or me being delusional, but I'm pretty damn sure that I didn't go out there at all. I was sick, and I'm a huge baby when I'm sick. Hank even told me that it was weird that I wasn't bitching about having felt bad, and that I wasn't harassing Andy over his germ issues. And I clearly remember doing nothing but sleeping, playing video games, going on the internet on my dial-up ass internet, and watching the Sci-Fi Channel. In addition, my room was 3 stories up, and if I'd left it, I would have woken up my parents, who wake up really easily. Had they been asleep when I supposedly headed out there, and they weren't. I remember my mom coming into my room to watch TV with me at around that time. But on the other hand, I doubt my friends were smart enough to have an elaborate lie like that, or that they'd care enough even to tell it, and they seemed very sincere. That and Hank's mom later confirmed that I had in fact stopped by and asked where they were, and that she'd noted I smelled awful and seemed off, but she assumed it's because I was sick and hadn't bathed. His mom and mine, who had been friends, actually had a major falling out, arguing about whether or not I'd showed up there, and none of my friends ever believed me. I never thought much of it. I figured it was just a mean joke or something, until more recently. This is probably tied to an earlier event that had happened over the summer. Over the summer, we found that in the woods, there was this area that had been converted into a paintball fort. There were lots of elaborate tunnels and trenches and a few sheds and buildings. It was all really cool, but apparently abandoned. Some of it was even flooded, for example, and we had spent a good few afternoons playing out there, even though it was always sort of unnerving. You felt completely watched, you know. A good example is, I remember Michelle joking that some big burly guys could pop out from the tunnels, kill us, and kidnap her. She did it sort of nervously, like you do when you're trying to make yourself feel better by joking about your fears. One afternoon, we headed out there on our bikes and were goofing around, pretending to be soldiers or something like that. We did this for hours. Andy, Michelle, Hank, Corey, and a few other people. It got dark out, and I found myself alone in one of the trenches when I began to hear splashing from one of the submerged tunnels. I figured someone had fallen in or been pushed in. I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, Corey jumped into the trench with me. Now, someone else was an outsider. It was him. He was chubby, annoying, and weird. So what happened next wasn't that out of character for him, although it still made me very uncomfortable. He came up beside me and just sat there and watched while smiling way too hard. I tried to carry on with the game, especially since I was the drill sergeant, and I'd hit puberty early, so my voice was deep, and they had picked me for this. But he was just distracting as shit and weirding me out. Finally, I just locked eyes with him and tried to stare him down. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He didn't do anything. He just looked back at me, smiling way too much. And then I realized he was soaking wet. Part of me, I remember was worried that someone had tried to drown him and that it had caused some kind of brain damage. But about then, he reached out. He put both hands on my shoulders, gripped me as tightly as he could. I had bruises after this, and just stared, smiling as broadly as he could. And then he let go, got up, and left. He did it for maybe 15 seconds. Any longer, and I'd have screamed, and then just left, nothing said. I just sat there, bewildered and a bit frightened, and I remember realizing that he was freezing. It was hot and humid out still. My shirt was stuck to my back from the sweat, and I felt greasy the entire summer. But he was freezing. I figured he was cold from the water, so I got out and tried to follow him. But he was just gone, nowhere to be seen. I went in a trench with Andy and a couple of other people and carried on for a bit, but they realized that I wasn't really in the game anymore, and we stopped playing a bit later. I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now. Corey was dry when we got on our bikes and left. I think I either didn't think about it, or I thought that he just dried fast in the heat and never mentioned it to anyone, as he was a bit weird in general, but we didn't play out there again after that. I wonder if any of the others had something else happen. My last story, though, happened a little bit after the second. It was close to Halloween that year. We had all gotten cheap Halloween masks at Walmart, and we decided one night to play tag outside while wearing them. We did that for a few hours. It was actually more like a tag or hide-and-seek combo, and it took a while to finish playing. I remember clearly, though, that there were 6 of us out there, everyone mentioned plus Michelle's friend, and that at multiple times I saw a 7th person wearing a mask that we didn't have. I figured it was someone switching masks until later when I realized that nobody had a mask like that. I then sort of decided not to mention it. 1, because I figured it was the weird girl who lived down the street, who actually would have been too short, thinking about it now, and 2, because I didn't want to scare anyone. Nothing really scary happened. We'd just be running, and I'd see them running in the opposite direction and go hiding or something like that. It was just weird. Actually, stuff where we'd come up with an extra person happened occasionally, but no one ever really thought anything about it. We just kind of thought that we miscounted and carried on. Those islands can be a very weird place. Growing up in the mountains of North Georgia, camping and hiking were things that me and my brother did so often that it was second nature. So anytime Ryan and I had a break from school, we would basically head straight for the woods. We packed our gear, let our parents know where we were going, and that was that. No questions asked. So we decided to camp about midways through Jack's River Trail in the Cohutta Wilderness. It's a trail that we knew fairly well, as we had used it a few times before to practice long hikes. We arrived at the trailhead around lunchtime, parked the car, got our gear out, and headed out into the woods. We passed by a few hikers as we moved along, and we'd ask them how the trail looked, and the answer was always the same: wet. Jack's River Trail probably crossed the river 50 times as it went along its 17-mile-plus journey, and with the colder temperatures of late fall setting in, it was harder for the trail to stay dry. We moved deeper into the trail and started to look for a place to make camp. This is where Ryan and I made our first mistake. You see, Ryan and I have this rule: we don't camp near people, if at all possible. Call us paranoid, but the last thing we want is for someone to drag us out of our tents and into the woods, never to be seen again. So we always camped a pretty decent ways off of the trail and in the area that wasn't super popular with overnight camping. Roughly 2.5 hours or so, we found what we thought was the perfect place to set up for the 2 nights that we would be out. We came up to a horseshoe bend and ventured about half a mile off the trail and into a clearing and set up. We built a teepee fire for that night, and we pitched our tents on either side. After setting up and unloading, we decided to walk back to the trail and go exploring some of the many swimming holes that Jack's River has to offer. This was all during Thanksgiving break, and I remember being surprised at how few people were on the trail. Maybe it was the weather, or the fact that it was really early in the week, but there didn't seem to be anyone hiking, much less anyone staying the night. Around 5 o'clock or so, Ryan and I headed back to camp to start our fire, make dinner, and settle in for the night. Just as soon as the sun began to set, the cold rushed in. We added more wood to the fire, sat close, and just enjoyed conversation. Ryan was 2 years behind me in school. I was a senior, and he was a sophomore, but growing up we had always been close. We always hung out in the same groups, played the same sports, had the same hobbies, etc. Come 9 o'clock, we were settled comfortably around the fire. I had just texted our mom to let her know that we were safe and getting ready for bed, and I remember we were talking about dreading going to our grandparents' house for Thanksgiving and having the same awkward conversations we had each year with family that we only saw on the holidays. And then things started to get strange. We were no stranger to sounds in the woods, and these woods were full of animals, from deer to black bears, and even the random wild boar. If you were in the woods enough, you learned to distinguish certain sounds, and what we were hearing I could only chalk up to as odd. What Ryan and I heard was what sounded like someone sneaking around slowly, just out of eyesight. With an animal walking on 4 legs, you hear a tighter group of footsteps, but what we were hearing was very distinct. It sounded quite close to what a human would sound like, especially when they're walking slowly, trying to move without making much sound. I remember we both pulled out our flashlights and shone it in the direction that we felt the sounds were coming from. But that is what was so weird. Whenever we would fix our lights on a spot that we thought the sounds were coming from, the location of the sound would suddenly change. It was as if there were multiple people walking around us. That's when the whistling started. At first I thought it was the wind, and I remember thinking maybe the wind is just throwing leaves around, and what we are hearing is nothing but the wilderness around us. Ryan looked at me and asked if I was hearing that. I didn't answer, and I was trying to focus hard on each individual sound. 2 consecutive notes with roughly a 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes, over and over again. Ryan kept asking me if I had heard that, but I put my finger to my lips, trying to keep him from talking. The fear I felt was incredible. My jaw was tight, my fist clenched, knowing I wasn't ready for whatever was out there, if it was anything at all. The whistling continued for what felt like forever, but thinking it through was maybe 5 minutes when Ryan finally yelled out into the darkness, "Hey!" It was followed by silence. The whistling stopped. The crunching of the wood stopped. Nothing. I was pissed. I looked at Ryan with a "what the hell" look. He shrugged his shoulders. He whispered, "I had to do something." I just shook my head. We sat there in silence for a few minutes when the woods erupted with noise. Something or someone was running in a circle around our campsite. The whistling came back, 2 consecutive notes with the same 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. How could somebody whistle this loudly without cracking while also running? I was done. I stood up, shining my flashlight in all directions, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was screwing with us. But nothing. It felt close enough to touch, but we never saw a thing. That's when the movement stopped, but the whistling was still constant. It was so loud, inhumanly loud. I looked at Ryan and told him to call the police. Now this is the part I will never forget, the part that I never like to talk about. While Ryan was on the phone with a dispatcher, and telling them our location and what was going on. I stepped around the fire toward my tent. Inside my bag, I had a 6-inch fixed blade that I always carried, and I thought maybe I would feel a bit more comfortable with it in my hand more than just a flashlight. As I went to unzip my tent, trying to keep my eyes toward the woods, I heard some movement directly in front of me. I swept my light up in front of me, and for maybe 2 seconds, I saw it. Whatever this person or thing was, it was about 5 feet up in the tree. Everything about it was long. Its arms, its legs, its neck, its fingers, everything. And it was fast. As soon as the light touched it, it launched backwards off of the tree. I heard it land, but it either jumped at an impossible distance or landed in a thicket, because I heard it but never saw it. I don't think I have ever yelled so loud. I ran back to where Ryan was and sat down. He kept asking me what I saw, but I couldn't answer. I just kept thinking about what I saw. Maybe 10 minutes later, we saw a couple of flashlight beams coming through the woods, and about 3 guys came into view, asking if everything was okay. I settled a bit and started asking them if they had seen or heard anything. All they said was that they had heard a lot of movement and then heard my scream, and that's when they headed in our direction. I tried to explain what had happened without sounding crazy, but it didn't seem to work. One of the guys walked around a bit and came back and said he didn't see anything. Ryan told them that we called the police, and roughly 30 minutes later, a park ranger showed up. Ryan and I tried explaining everything to him, but he just chalked it up to either a curious animal or some campers trying to mess with us. Either way, Ryan and I decided that we were not staying the night. We packed our stuff up and walked out of the woods with the ranger. He took our statement, and we got in our car and drove home. Ryan and I don't talk about what happened that night, but neither of us have been back to Jack's River Trail, and probably will never go back. So those encounters were pretty insane, in my opinion. If you thought so and there was a specific one that stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? As always, I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also down there is the PayPal and Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And also, of course, like and subscribe and the notification bell and all that stuff that if you got this far in the video, then I hope you either have done or will do. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me. Thank you for watching, and have a good week.